"The truth is, Ms. Bennett, we've run out of options." The doctor's words landed harder than any boardroom defeat Claire Bennett had ever suffered. Cold white light washed over the consultation room. On the wall, a clock ticked with cruel steadiness while Claire's 10-year-old daughter, Lily, sat by the window, staring at rain sliding down the glass. Claire had built a billion-dollar technology company from nothing. She had faced lawsuits, hostile investors, and competitors who wanted to destroy her. Yet in that silent room, wearing a tailored black coat and holding a medical discharge form in her trembling hand, she had never felt so powerless. "She understands everything," Claire said. "She just can't speak." The doctor lowered his eyes. "We've tried every program available." Claire signed the paper with the same silver pen she used to approve mergers and fire executives. But this signature felt like surrender. Lily glanced at her mother, then quickly looked away. An hour later, Claire's driver stopped outside a small cafe in downtown Chicago. Claire had an investor meeting nearby, but she could not bear to take Lily home yet. Home had become too quiet, filled with therapists' notes, expensive devices, and unanswered questions. Inside the cafe, amber lights glowed against rain-darkened windows. Cups clinked. Milk steamed. Conversations blended into a warm hum that seemed to belong to another world. Claire chose a corner table. Lily sat across from her, still wearing her pale yellow coat. She pushed the menu away without looking at it. A young waiter approached with 2 glasses of water. His name tag read Daniel. His shoes were worn at the edges, and the sleeve of his white shirt had been carefully stitched near the cuff. A faded canvas backpack rested behind the counter. From its half-open zipper, the corner of an old blue book was visible, its cover cracked and softened by years of use. Before Daniel could speak, Lily's elbow struck the water glass. It shattered on the floor. The cafe manager spun around. "Daniel, be careful." "It wasn't him," Claire said sharply. Several customers stared. Lily froze, her face burning with shame. Her hands moved beneath the table, quick and tense. Claire recognized only one sign. "Sorry." Daniel slowly crouched to gather the broken glass. He did not look annoyed. He did not call for a towel or tell Lily everything was fine in the loud, exaggerated voice adults often used with her. Instead, he raised his hands. "You don't have to apologize." Lily's eyes widened. For the first time that day, she looked directly at someone. Daniel continued signing. Glass breaks. People don't. The entire cafe seemed to disappear around them. Lily's fingers moved hesitantly. "You understand me?" Daniel smiled. Every word. Claire stopped breathing. For years, specialists had spoken about Lily while she sat in the room. Teachers had praised her as if she could not understand pity. Strangers had mistaken silence for emptiness. But this poorly dressed waiter had looked at her daughter and seen a person. Lily suddenly signed faster, emotion rushing through her hands. Daniel watched carefully, and the warmth faded from his face. "What did she say?" Claire whispered. Daniel looked toward the old blue book inside his backpack, then back at Lily. "She asked where I learned the sign you use when you tell her good night." Claire's face went pale, because Claire had never taught that sign to anyone. Only Lily's father had known it. Daniel did not answer immediately. He looked at Lily's hands as if they had opened a door he had kept locked for years. Then he glanced toward the manager, who was already watching him with irritation. "Daniel, table 6 is waiting. I'll be there in a minute." The manager's jaw tightened, but Daniel stayed beside Lily. Claire noticed something she had missed before. Daniel's hands were rough, marked by small burns and shallow cuts from years of kitchen work. Yet when he signed, every movement was patient and precise. "Who taught you that sign?" Claire asked. Daniel swallowed. Someone who believed silence didn't mean a person had nothing to say. Before Claire could press him, another waiter called for help. Daniel apologized and returned to work, leaving Claire with questions she could not contain. For the next 20 minutes, Lily watched him move between tables. He carried heavy trays, wiped spills, and accepted rude complaints with a quiet nod. When an impatient customer snapped his fingers at him, Daniel simply approached and asked what was needed. No anger, no pride, just calm. That calm had taken years to build. Daniel Reyes had grown up in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the west side of Chicago. His mother cleaned offices at night. His father disappeared before Daniel turned 8, leaving behind unpaid bills and a silence no one knew how to explain. Daniel's younger sister, Sophia, had been born deaf. Doctors told their mother that Sophia would struggle all her life. Teachers spoke slowly to her, as if deafness had made her less intelligent. Other children laughed when she moved her hands. Daniel never did. When he was 12, he found an old blue sign language book in a donation box at a neighborhood shelter. The cover was cracked, several pages were missing, and handwritten notes filled the margins. He taught himself one sign at a time. Food, home, afraid, brother. The first complete sentence Sophia ever signed to him was simple. You are my safe place. From that day on, Daniel carried the book everywhere. Years later, their mother became sick, and Daniel left community college to work 2 jobs. He washed dishes before sunrise, served coffee in the afternoon, and repaired appliances on weekends. Then Sophia died unexpectedly from a heart condition no one had known was worsening. After the funeral, Daniel stopped signing. The language felt too full of her. But he never threw away the blue book. He kept it in his backpack, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag whenever it rained. Inside the back cover was a faded photograph of 14-year-old Daniel standing beside Sophia and a tall man in a gray coat. That man had visited the shelter every Saturday. He brought sandwiches, fixed broken heaters, and treated Daniel and Sophia as though they mattered. He had also created one special sign for Sophia whenever she became frightened. 2 fingers pressed gently over the heart, followed by an open hand moving toward the light. It meant, I'm here, even when you can't hear me. It was the same sign Claire used every night with Lily. When Daniel finally returned to their table, his face had changed. He placed the old blue book between them. Then he opened it to the photograph. Claire stared at the tall man in the gray coat. Her hand began to shake. Lily leaned closer and touched the picture with one finger. Daniel's voice was barely audible. Mrs. Bennett, that man saved my sister's life. Claire looked up at him, tears already forming. The man in the photograph was her late husband. Claire stared at the photograph until the café around her blurred. Her husband, Michael, had died 3 years earlier in a private plane crash. Since then, Claire had spent millions preserving his public legacy. Charity foundations, scholarships, research grants, but she had never heard him mention Daniel, Sophia, or a neighborhood shelter on the west side. That can't be possible, Claire whispered. Daniel did not argue. He simply turned the photograph over. On the back, written in Michael Bennett's familiar handwriting, were 5 words, for the ones no one hears. Claire's chest tightened. Before she could speak again, the cafe manager appeared beside the table. His name was Mr. Collins, a narrow-faced man with polished shoes and the habit of smiling only at wealthy customers. He looked at the old book, the photograph, and Claire's shaken expression. Is there a problem, ma'am? No, Daniel said quietly. I wasn't asking you. Lily's fingers curled around the edge of the table. Mr. Collins leaned closer to Claire. This employee has been warned before about bothering customers with personal stories. Daniel lowered his eyes, but his voice remained steady. She asked me a question. You abandoned 3 tables. I was helping her daughter. Mr. Collins gave a short, humorless laugh. You serve coffee. You don't help families. The words cut through the room. Several customers turned to look. A woman near the window lifted her phone, sensing drama. Daniel stood still beside the table in his worn shoes, while Claire remained seated in a coat worth more than he earned in a year. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Mr. Collins reached for the blue book. This should not be out during your shift. Daniel moved his hand over it before the manager could take it. It was the first time his calm seemed to crack. Please don't touch that. The manager's face hardened. So now you're giving me orders? Claire wanted to intervene, but another thought stopped her. She had spent years surrounded by people who changed their voices when they recognized her. Daniel had not asked who she was. He had not mentioned money. He had not used Michael's photograph to demand anything. Still, fear whispered inside her. What if this was planned? What if Daniel had recognized Lily? What if the story about Sophia was meant to reach Claire's sympathy, and then her bank account? Power had taught Claire to question kindness. Mr. Collins folded his arms. Empty your apron pockets. Daniel looked at him. Why? Because last week cash went missing from the register. A murmur moved across the cafe. Daniel's face went pale, but he did not raise his voice. You know I wasn't working that night. I know you need money. That sentence landed harder than the accusation. Daniel slowly removed a pen, an order pad, 2 sugar packets, and a small silver key. Nothing else. Mr. Collins glanced toward the backpack. Open that too. Lily suddenly stood. Her chair scraped loudly across the floor. She began signing rapidly, anger flashing across her face. Claire caught only fragments. Wrong. Cruel. He helped me. Mr. Collins stared at her hands, uncomfortable. What is she doing? Daniel watched Lily, then softly translated. She says you're accusing the only person here who listened to her. The cafe fell silent. Mr. Collins' cheeks reddened. That's enough. Daniel, take your things and leave. Daniel closed the blue book carefully. He slid the photograph back inside, placed it in his backpack, and tied the broken zipper with a piece of string. He did not defend himself. He did not beg. He only turned to Lily and signed one final sentence. Never let someone else's doubt become your silence. Then he walked toward the door. But before he reached it, Lily made a sound. It was small, rough, and barely more than breath. Yet it stopped everyone in the cafe. Daniel stopped with one hand on the cafe door. For a second, no one moved. The espresso machine hissed behind the counter. Rain tapped against the windows. Somewhere near the kitchen, a spoon slipped from someone's fingers and struck the floor. Lily stood beside her chair, trembling. Her mouth remained slightly open, as if the single name had escaped before fear could pull it back. Claire rose so quickly that her glass tipped over. Lily! The girl looked terrified. For 3 years, Claire had waited for that sound. She had imagined hearing it in a therapy room, a hospital office, or the quiet safety of home. Not in a crowded cafe. Not while a waiter was being thrown out. Daniel slowly turned around. He did not smile. He did not rush toward her. He seemed to understand that even joy could become pressure when too many people were watching. He lowered himself to one knee several feet away. Then he raised his hands. You don't have to do it again. Lily's breathing steadied. Claire's heart broke at the gentleness of it. Every specialist had encouraged repetition. Every therapist had praised attempts. Every adult had waited for Lily to perform hope for them. Daniel asked for nothing. He signed again. Your hands are enough. Lily stared at him, tears gathering in her eyes. Then her fingers moved. I wasn't trying to say your name. Daniel tilted his head. What were you trying to say? Lily touched 2 fingers to her heart, then opened her hand toward the light. The private goodnight sign. The sign Michael had once made for Sophia. Daniel's face changed. He stood and looked at Claire. That isn't just a comforting gesture, he said. It's the beginning of a sentence. Claire frowned. What sentence? Daniel returned to the table and opened the old blue book. He flipped past yellowed pages until he found a sheet covered in Michael's handwriting. Beneath the drawing of the familiar sign were 3 additional movements. Daniel showed them to Lily. Her eyes widened with recognition. She had seen them before. Suddenly she grabbed a napkin and Claire's pen. Her hand moved quickly across the paper, sketching the same symbols again and again. Then she pointed toward Claire's phone. Daniel understood first. She wants you to open the videos of her father. Claire's breath caught. There were hundreds of them stored in a private folder. Birthdays, vacations, ordinary evenings she had not been able to watch since Michael died. With shaking fingers, she opened the final video recorded before his flight. Michael sat beside Lily's bed. He smiled at the camera, then signed the familiar motion over his heart. But this time, Claire did not stop the video after the gesture. Daniel leaned closer. Michael continued signing. I'm here, even when you can't hear me. Then came 3 more signs. When you are ready, tell your mother. Lily reached for the phone and dragged the progress bar backward. She watched the sequence again, then pointed to the final movement. Daniel went pale. That last sign means hidden. Claire stared at her daughter. Hidden where? Lily rushed to Daniel's backpack, pulled out the old blue book, and carefully pressed the cracked back cover. Something clicked. A thin compartment opened inside the binding. A small brass key fell onto the table. Engraved on its surface were 2 letters. CB. Claire recognized them instantly. They were the initials of a private deposit box Michael had closed, or claimed to have closed, days before his death. Mr. Collins took a step back. The cafe was completely silent now. Daniel looked from the key to Lily, then to Claire. Your husband didn't teach her a goodnight sign, he whispered. He taught her how to protect a secret. Daniel stared at the brass key as though it had fallen out of another life. I've carried that book for 15 years, he said. I never knew there was anything inside it. Claire picked up the key carefully. The metal was warm from Lily's hand. The initials did not belong to a bank. They stood for Children's Bridge, the small shelter where Michael had first met Daniel and Sophia. Claire remembered the name now. Years ago, Michael had proposed a quiet education fund for children with disabilities. The project disappeared after his death, buried beneath legal disputes and company restructuring. Claire had assumed it had never gone beyond an idea. Daniel turned the book over. Beneath the torn fabric of the back cover was a line of faded handwriting he had never noticed. When the child finds her voice, open the bridge. Claire felt the room tilt. Michael had known Lily might one day recognize the sign. He had trusted that the book would remain with Daniel, and that Daniel would understand what others could not. But why Daniel? The answer was written in the margins. Daniel opened the first page. The notes he had believed were lessons from an unknown donor were all in Michael's handwriting. Do not correct a frightened child too quickly. Look at the eyes before the hands. Silence can be a shield, not an emptiness. Daniel's fingers traced the words. He remembered the winter Sophia stopped attending school because other children mocked her. Their apartment had no heat. Their mother was working nights, and Daniel had been trying to repair a broken space heater with a kitchen knife. Michael arrived at the shelter carrying sandwiches and found Daniel asleep beside Sophia, his coat wrapped around her shoulders. He did not offer them money that day. He sat on the floor and learned how to sign his own name. The next week, he returned with the old blue book. You taught me this? Daniel whispered, looking at Lily. Your father taught me how to listen before I ever knew who he was. Claire's eyes filled. Michael had never told her because he had never done kindness for applause. He had helped Daniel quietly, then trusted the boy's character more than wealth, lawyers, or institutions. Lily touched the photograph of Sophia. Daniel signed her name. For the first time since entering the cafe, he allowed himself to cry. She was afraid people would forget her, he said. Lily shook her head and signed slowly. I heard her through you. Daniel covered his mouth. That was the miracle no doctor had created. Lily had not spoken because she was suddenly cured. She had spoken because, for one brief moment, she felt completely understood. Daniel had given her what every expensive program had failed to provide: safety without expectation. Claire looked toward Mr. Collins. The manager stood near the counter, pale and ashamed. A security camera above the register blinked steadily. Claire's business instincts returned. Show me the footage from the night the money disappeared. Mr. Collins hesitated. Claire's voice became cold. Now. Minutes later, the recording appeared on a tablet. The room watched as Mr. Collins opened the register after closing, removed an envelope of cash, and slipped it into his own briefcase. No one spoke. Daniel did not look triumphant. He only looked tired. Claire turned to him. My husband trusted you with his secret. Daniel shook his head. No. He trusted kindness to survive long enough to reach her. Outside, the rain had stopped, Claire closed her hand around the brass key, knowing that behind whatever door it opened was not merely money. It was the final promise Michael had left for all three of them. 3 days later, Claire stood outside a red brick building on Chicago's west side, holding Michael's brass key in one hand and Lily's fingers in the other. The faded sign above the entrance read Children's Bridge. Daniel waited near the steps in the same worn shoes he had worn at the cafe. He had refused Claire's offer to send a car for him. Inside, an elderly director led them to a storage room beneath the old library. The key opened a narrow steel cabinet hidden behind a row of donated books. There were no stacks of cash inside. There was something far more valuable. Michael had left legal documents establishing a private trust worth $20 million. The money was intended to create free communication centers for deaf, nonverbal, and socially isolated children. But the trust could only be activated by 2 people: Claire, as Lily's guardian, and the unnamed keeper of the blue book, Daniel Reyes. Claire read the final letter aloud, her voice breaking. Daniel, if this reaches you, then you kept listening. Claire, if Lily brought you here, then she found someone who made her feel safe enough to be heard. Daniel lowered his head. Lily stood between them, holding the old blue book against her yellow coat. The letter continued. Do not build another place where adults speak about children. Build one where children can speak in every way they know. 6 months later, the first Bennett Reyes Communication Center opened in the restored Children's Bridge building. Daniel did not accept charity. He accepted a job. Claire paid for him to complete his education in child development and sign language interpretation, while he served as the center's community director. His mother moved into a safe apartment nearby. Sophia's photograph was placed in the entrance hall beneath a simple inscription. She taught us that listening is an act of love. As for Mr. Collins, the stolen money was returned, and he was dismissed. Weeks later, he sent Daniel a handwritten apology. Daniel did not excuse what had happened, but he chose not to let bitterness become another kind of prison. Claire changed too. She began leaving the office before dark. She stopped measuring progress by spoken words alone. At home, she learned sign language properly, not from assistants or therapists, but from Lily. One evening, as they sat beneath the warm lights of the new center, Claire signed awkwardly. Am I doing it right? Lily smiled and corrected her fingers. Then she spoke softly and slowly. You're listening. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Across the room, Daniel watched children communicate through hands, pictures, tablets, gestures, and sounds. No one rushed them. No one looked away. Lily walked over and handed him the blue book. He shook his head. It belongs with you now. Lily pressed it back into his hands and signed. Some stories need a keeper. Daniel smiled. And some need a voice. The world had once seen a powerless child, an exhausted mother, and an invisible waiter. But one shattered glass, one patient gesture, and one old book had changed all of their lives. Because sometimes the person who speaks the least is carrying the most important truth. And sometimes kindness is simply learning how to listen. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment for someone who deserves to feel heard. Like, subscribe, and share it with a person who may need the reminder that silence is never emptiness.